It's my pleasure to yield some time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As is often our custom when we have witnesses take their time and come to appear before us, and we see them chomping at the bit, we know there may be something they would like to add to the testimony or what's been said. So I would yield to Ms. Nomani for that.
Thank you so much, Representative Johnson. I just think that it is unconscionable, but completely predictable what we have just witnessed today. Because while there has been serious conversation about the need to address issues of discrimination, surveillance, and other issues of privacy and constitutionality, not one person from the Democratic side has taken seriously the very real discrimination that is happening now in the name of critical race theory. But instead, I was ridiculed. And then when I dared to try to take a video of this, I was intimidated, just like parents face in school boards and school districts all across the country. And do you know what? A federal judge has validated what we have said to our school board for 2 years.
Right.
We have been ignored. And the one thing that I think every Democratic lawmaker should recognize as a word of advice is that the parents spoke up in Virginia, and they elected Governor Glenn Youngkin. The parents spoke up in San Francisco, and they recalled 3 school board members. And who was one of those school board members? She was this woman who dared to use the N-word about Asians, calling us the House N-word. And she has now lost her job. There is a very real discrimination with the privilege matrix, the oppression matrix that is targeting brown and black parents and children. And then also, we must care about all children. This is a very real book. Not my idea, and it's certainly not my idea. It says whiteness is a bad deal, and then a contract with the devil. No child in America should ever feel shame. No child should ever feel discrimination, and it is unconscionable that we do not recognize that we cannot replace one hierarchy of human value with another hierarchy of human value. We must protect the integrity of humanity.
That is so well said. And, I'll just close with this and I'll yield back, but we used to all agree upon Dr. King's admonition that we be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. And this has now gone full circle the other way. People are being discriminated against because of what they look like. And I thought that's what we were all against. But CRT is doing this. It is insidious, and they're putting it in the curriculum. And however well-intended some people may think that it was at its origin, Madam Chair, it has turned into a weapon that is being used against children. And that is detestable, and we will stand against it at every turn. I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Nomani, in recent years, equality has been replaced with equity as the central focus of the modern civil rights movement. And we've seen how this has played out in a number of contexts, and you've testified today. It's been very compelling about how this has had a real effect in the public education context. Your testimony was really amazing. I mean, so the local school officials actually went to your minority community, and simply because you expressed your views as concerned parents about the curriculum, they said, and these are your quotes, "We need a different kind of minority." They said, you must check your privileges at the door, whatever in the world that means, and that you're white adjacent. I mean, how offensive is that? Yet you took a stand. All of you got together. You took a stand, and you rounded up the parents group. You started the Coalition for TJ, the Thomas Jefferson High School in Northern Virginia. And you just won in court, as you said, against this really insidious racism of critical race theory-centered policies that are a scourge upon the nation right now. So here's the question. How can other parent groups organize and stand together like you all have? Because I think this is very inspiring and instructional for other people.
Thank you so much, Representative Johnson, and thank you to all of the representatives on the House Judiciary Committee that have actually had the backs of parents. We are ordinary moms and dads, and we did not choose to have fights with our school boards or with principals. But in fact, we have decided that there are positions of value that matter to us. And what we want to encourage every parent is to have courage, have moral courage. And everybody who wants to shut us down needs to understand that nobody comes between a parent and their baby. Nobody comes between a parent and the child's education. And so what we want to do at Parents Defending Education, we invite people to register their parent groups, come to us and get tips on how to speak to the school board, how to file a Freedom of Information Act request. And what I want to encourage your Democratic lawmakers also to do is to take the letter that the Republican leaders, the committee, sent just yesterday, asking serious questions about the new oversight, surveillance, and monitoring that is happening of parents. Every single thing that was said here today is now being done to parents. And that is unconstitutional and illegal. And I really hope that your Democratic lawmakers will also team up with you to understand that parents are our friends. They are not the enemy.
Absolutely, and showing moral courage inspires courage in others, and that's what's so important. It's a big part of what it means to be an American, to stand against this kind of stuff. The Republicans in our committee stood together, and we are very concerned about the weaponization of the Department of Justice, and no one lower than the Attorney General himself. The source of your T-shirt, they labeled concerned parents as domestic terrorists for expressing their views about what's happening in their curriculum. And so we're on top of that. We are seeking some oversight. We'll make sure that we don't weaponize the federal government against concerned parents, at least after the next election cycle. Mr. Westhill, I got to move on because I don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to ask you, you began to explain how the new advancement of equity as the benchmark is inconsistent with our civil rights laws and constitutional protections. You used the word or the phrase affirmative discrimination. Could you unpack that just a little bit more, in a minute and a half here?
Sure, thank you very much for the question, Ranking Member Johnson. Affirmative discrimination is essentially plain old discrimination, like we've known in this country for many, many years. It just happens to be the case that it's being used in an official format at educational institutions, in contracting, in businesses, and it's the sort of thing that is the overt racial discrimination of the past that we were hoping we would get past in this country at some point, come back on steroids. That's what I mean.
Well, that's right. And there are elements in our politics and in the culture right now, the radical left, they're recasting racism and discrimination and equality for this zeal of equal outcomes, this quixotic quest that's not going to happen. Equity is dangerous. It's a poison to our system. It impedes actual progress in improving race relations and opportunity in the United States. And I think parents, citizens, people are beginning to recognize this, and they need more avenues to express their outrage. We have election cycles. There's one component of that, but I'm really grateful for the work that both of you are doing in organizations that you lead and others like it, because this is the way we affect change in America. So thanks for being here. Thanks for your time. All of our witnesses for your time today. I yield back.
Quickly go to Ms. Nomani. Thank you for being here. So I noticed your shirt. It says, I'm a mom, not a domestic terrorist. This is an issue that this committee has at least the Republicans have. Once we learned about the memorandum from the Attorney General, memorandum targeting, you got it right there. Well, you got the letter right there from the School Board Association. But I'm just curious, do you think, as someone who's been active in defending the rights of parents, moms and dads in our schools, are you nervous about this now because of a whistleblower who came forward and gave us the email sent from the FBI to agents around the country talking about this threat tag label being placed on parents? Are you nervous that that designation, that label, that tag may be now associated with your name?
I know that we are now under surveillance as parents. We are seeing it in local authorities, state authorities, and federal authorities. And if everybody here is in agreement that they do not want surveillance and undue persecution of any human being, that should include parents. And I applaud you all for just being there for the mama bears and papa bears. Because you know what? We are in the trenches and we are fighting. And it was a mom in Fairfax County, Virginia, who revealed to us that Attorney General Merrick Garland's son-in-law is benefiting from the big tech company contracts with school boards. And so what I want to encourage every parent to do is just be a Nancy Drew, Hardy Boy, whichever way it is, in your school district. filed those Freedom of Information Act requests, and that's how we got the emails that traced exactly this school board letter to the White House.
Madam Chair, I would just reiterate the numerous times that Republicans have asked to have the Attorney General back. Remember, his testimony that day said in no way were they treating parents as domestic terrorists, when in fact the day before he made that statement, that email went out to FBI agents around the country that said, put this designation on moms and dads. So once again, we need the Attorney General back here to answer some critical questions, and frankly, what we really need is for him to rescind the memorandum and stop this process he has put in place that is targeting moms and dads. With that, I yield back.
And the BBC. She has been an advocate for moderation in Islam. She previously was a professor in the practice of journalism at Georgetown University. Ms. Nomani, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all the distinguished lawmakers that are here today. Just across the Potomac River on Sunday, I stood with a group of parents on a back deck, and we were celebrating our triumph against racism, against systemic racism. But it wasn't against a white supremacist organization that we had won. We had defeated racism by the 12 school board members in Fairfax County Public Schools, all endorsed, alas, by the Democratic Party. My testimony is a warning cry about a new racism that is occurring in the United States today. It is targeting South Asians, Muslims, and Arabs, along with many other people. So many people are now being impacted by a divisive ideology that is in our schools also. It replaces the old hierarchy of human value with a new hierarchy of human value. Neither is acceptable. And federal authorities, state and local authorities are subjecting us to surveillance, harassment, and criminal prosecution when we as parents stand up to this new racism. Born in India and raised in West Virginia, I moved to Northern Virginia in 2008 because I thought that the state had now voted for President Obama and it was now progressive enough for a minority like myself. I moved there as a single mother with my son just 5 years old. And in Virginia, he grew up. In 2017, my son learned that he had gained admission to Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology. It was the realization of the American dream for us. But then, on June 7th, 2020, we received an email from the white principal at the school. And she told us, the mostly Asian, mostly immigrant parents and students at the school, that we needed to check our privileges. She told us that we had to change admission to Thomas Jefferson High School because she wanted a different type of minority. Of course, we want all students to succeed, of course. But all of a sudden, our parents were on the wrong side of brown. And let me share with you some of the names from our student directory. They are names of the types of people that this hearing is concerned about. Last names like Singh, Patel, Abdul, Malik, and then my name, Nomani. What are our privileges? Suparna Datta, a mother, came here with dollars in her pocket to study in Tennessee. Yu Yanzhou, she stood in Tiananmen Square for human rights. And then when she read this email from the principal, she had traumatic flashbacks to that moment when she was a child and her teacher made her stand up and take off the red scarf that she had received as a symbol of her privilege in the Communist Party. School board members, activists, policymakers started calling us slurs like white adjacent, resource hoarders, toxic, racist. I had never before in my decades of life in the United States experienced so much aggression and hostility against us. And in one text, a school board member said, "We know that this policy is anti-Asian, LOL. laughing out loud. We all know in this hearing that racism is not a laughing matter. But guess what? Our brave parents came together and we created an organization called Coalition for TJ. And we went to court with the lawyers of Pacific Legal Foundation who fight for civil rights. And guess what? Just this Friday afternoon, we got an email. We won. We won in protecting our families from the racism that is now being perpetuated in our school system. This is a significant victory. This is huge. This is what is a national security issue today as we compete against China. But how did this happen? How did we go from this ideology of critical race theory that says that we must look at all of society through the lens of race, and then become this, how to be an anti-racist, in which this ideologue says that we can only, can you imagine this? Correct past discrimination by present discrimination. What kind of a country is this? That is not the kind of country that my father came to. Critical race theory and education. That's why we have this at TJ. And then they are reaching for our little babies. Woke baby, anti-racist baby. What are these concepts? These are concepts for racism.
Ms. Nomani, your time has expired.
Thank you. We, the families, we are parents, mama bears and papa bears. We do not want to be called domestic terrorists when we are protecting our baby cubs. We must all stand together for our country. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your testimony. The witnesses will be reminded that
Part of. Let me now address my questions, and I yield myself 5 minutes, the time that may be called upon to finish my questioning, because I do want to open with that we are a few days away from crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which reflected the shedding of blood for the right to vote by African Americans and other diverse Americans that ultimately joined Dr. King after Bloody Sunday, where our dear friend, late colleague, John Lewis, shed blood, as others did on that bridge. And I'm always moved by the emotion of that moment, of the shedding of blood for freedom. And so let me say that I don't hold Ms. Nomani or to Mr. Westhill any form of discrimination, nor do I think the members of my Democratic colleagues and members of the Democratic Party as well. We do believe, as John has taught us and Dr. King, in the beloved community. But let me try to set the record straight so that this continued miscalculation and politicalization and campaign rhetoric that has really hurt more than helped can be set. Now, there are many definitions to what we've been discussing, but let me put into the record, I think, a reasoned definition of which, if someone has a rebuttal, they can, when I say rebuttal, they have another definition, the record is open for you to submit it. Critical race theory is a cross-disciplinary intellectual and social movement of civil rights scholars and activists who seek to examine the intersection of race and law in the United States and to challenge mainstream America liberal approaches to racial justice. For example, the CRT conceptual framework is one way to study how and why U.S. courts give more lenient punishments to drug dealers from some races than to drug dealers of other races. The word critical in its name is an academic term that refers to critical thinking, critical theory, and scholarly criticism, rather than criticizing or blaming people. It first arose in the 1970s. The other critical schools of thought, such as critical legal studies, which examine how legal rules protect the status quo. It has nothing to do with teaching anyone in elementary school, middle school, or any place else. It is a scholarly effort to address the question of the intersection of law and race. Any books that have been done that have used it is because the author is unclear, imprecise, and without knowledge about that. Parents certainly have the right to engage with their school districts on what they believe is effective for their students. However, I will not accept the abuse of that term to come before us in this hearing that is talking about the absolute discrimination against people who cannot speak for themselves. So let me just show why this African-American young person had to have his hair cut off so that he could effectively participate in sports. And my friends decided to vote against something called the Crown Act, which means that whatever style hair you have is protected under the Constitution. Maybe you're not familiar with the story of Emmett Till. This is what his mother had to confront, this bloodied and mutilated head of a 14-year-old who went to Mississippi, an African-American, who suffered the indignities of violence. So I think this hearing that talks about discrimination in the civil rights of Muslim, Arab, and South Asian American communities is focused on how discrimination laws have undermined it over the period of their time here in the United States in ways that we can try and fix. We are problem solvers. We are grateful that the courts have responded to perceived discrimination, but in any event, what I would clearly say, and you need to put down your camera, please. You need to put down your camera. You need to put down your camera. It's
You're already on video.
I understand that, but I need the witness.
Why do I have to put down my camera?
Because I'm already on video, so I don't need to be on yours.
Is that a committee?
I mean, this is free speech.
There's not a rule on that, right?
I've asked respectfully, and you choose not to be respectful, and so I will allow you to continue on. Thank you so very much. But in any event, I believe that this hearing deals with the impact of discrimination on the groups who have suffered discrimination in such a large way. And so I'd like to make sure that we are focused on that. I'm disappointed that CRT has been politicized to attack people who simply want to ensure that our children have an opportunity to be engaged in diversity. I know that this words that I am saying now in the most calm way will be mutilated by the right-wing media. That is all they do. They do not act in truth, and they do not try to provoke truth. They try to provoke people. And we've been so busy trying to step away from that we saw what happened on January 6th, where, as Congressman Raskin said, they came, they beat, they attacked, they called names, and they made a mockery of democracy, and they attack the citadel of democracy. That is not what we're doing here in this hearing. So may I ask Ms. Berry, the Trump Muslim ban, various other discriminatory aspects that impact the Asian American community, I want to simply ask you the question: what kind of violence has been generated against Asian Americans and Arab Americans in particular, the Muslim ban that you've seen that has come out of the utilization of the Trump Muslim ban, the attack on how some Muslims may be attired, students in school? How is that atmosphere generated, from your perspective, violent acts against Muslim Americans? Ms. Berry?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for the question. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, we saw a significant surge in hate crimes in our country. One of the key things that we do at the Arab American Institute is try to increase hate crime data collection and reporting. We believe that data drives policy, and it's incredibly important that we have the accurate data on that. After the last year we have FBI hate crime data for is 2020, and it is literally the second highest year post 9/11. So from the 2016 presidential election to today, we have seen a marked increase in anti-hate against pretty much all communities. And we really do believe, while I'm not here to make a direct correlation between speech and hate, but when it emanates from our lawmakers, when it emanates from the presidential pulpit, it has a very real impact on communities and how they're targeted. And if I may, Congresswoman, I would love to take this opportunity because of what we're talking about here today. One of the most important things, Congresswoman Garcia pointed out that she was able to—
Excuse me, just a moment. Madam Chair, since we've gone so far, would you permit me an additional time period to ask?
The ranking member always has an additional time period, and then the chair will close. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Congresswoman Garcia was able to remove her name from a no-fly list because the no-fly list actually has a better redress process than the watch list. And I think that's a pretty extraordinary thing. The watch list, we don't even know the size of it, so you don't know you're on it. There are estimations it could be well over 1 million people. That's a problem. We need to have a better due process practices in place. And then the final point I want to make, because I do think this is a historical hearing. This is important that we're examining 20 years later the rights of Arab Americans and American Muslims and South Asians. And one of the most important things we can do as we reflect on that is to actually address the issue of profiling in a very meaningful way. In 2003, then Attorney General Ashcroft issued profiling guidance that said we will not profile.
Barry, if you can summarize.
Sorry. We will not profile in 2003. Regrettably, those loopholes were so big that we issued new guidance in 2014 saying we will not profile. We continue to have a loophole that exists for national security, border security, and local law enforcement. And until we find a remedy for that, regrettably, the policies that we're talking about here today that impact our communities directly, but I would argue all Americans, they will find their way to all Americans, we need to do better.
Thank you. I'd appreciate it if you would submit in writing why is detailed demographic data about the Arab American community important, and what work has your organization been doing to increase such data collection efforts? If you could submit that in writing, I'd appreciate it.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
I'd be interested just in this follow-up to the Sikh community, and I know of the tragedy that has occurred in the Sikh family and religion in Minnesota, but can you describe some of the Sikh Coalition's findings regarding bullying of Sikh youth, and whether or not that also generates into violence against the Sikh community?
Thank you, Congresswoman, for your question. According to multiple surveys that the Sikh Coalition has taken, Sikh American students experience high rates of bullying and harassment in our nation's public schools, and we continue receiving and documenting nationwide reports of school bullying.
Thank you.
Sikh boys who wear turbans are called terrorists, and girls are teased for having long hair, and many of these children are subjected to violence. Our research shows that the majority of Sikh children, just over 50% of which have endured school bullying. Over 2/3 or 67% reported that they were bullied in school, and turban Sikh children experience bullying at more than double the national rate. We know that it occurs not just on school grounds, but also on buses and increasingly on social media, such as Facebook, Twitter, and anonymous mobile phone apps. And despite the growing recognition of bullying as a national problem, lawmakers and school officials are not collecting comprehensive bullying data, and their enforcement of these anti-bullying policies that exist are completely inconsistent. We also know that Title IV is being used to enforce religious bullying by the Department of Justice. However, religious discrimination is not explicitly investigated by the Department of Education because it's not a protected category under Title VI. So that's an area where bullied kids are left without full access to recourse when they've suffered.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate those questions, and we'll have other questions submitted into the record.
This is an ideology that I call the woke army. It is an ideology of activists who are going through America's school districts and our communities, and what they are doing is a threat to democracy. What is the greatest threat that our children face today? It is the learning loss that has happened in our school districts. The Department of Justice declares clearly the characteristics that lead any human being to extremism include having less education. Chairman Raskin, I don't know if you know it, but the reading level in your school district, in Montgomery County Schools, is at 32% of kids that are reading at grade level. Math is at 30%. Congresswoman Tlaib is here. In Detroit, it's 18% and then 12% for math. It is a failure. This is a system failure. White supremacy must be defeated, as must all extremism. This is our mandate as adults for our children. Our children are in a crisis today, and the idea that we, the parents, are now the agents of white supremacy is unacceptable. All of these books that I have here today are the indoctrination that are being put into the minds of our children instead of the fundamentals that are critical to make them educated, enlightened citizens that protect our democracy. That is our greatest mandate, and that is the one that I am honored to serve with you to realize for our children. Asra Nomani, I came to the United States at the age of 4. I was an immigrant to the great state of New Jersey, and I grew up in Morgantown, West Virginia, a mostly white state. I was affirmed, I was supported, and I was able to grow up a girl who knew not a word of English when I arrived to become a reporter for the Wall Street Journal. I am sitting here before you today, apparently the face of white supremacy. I am wearing a shirt that my father made. My father survived, literally, white supremacy in India. My father is 5'3", because when he was a boy, the white supremacists that were the British rule in India literally funneled food away from the people of India, and my father starved. And so he grew up to be a young man who came to the United States of America, because he believed in the values and principles of this great nation. My father made this shirt for me, inspired by the gown that Representative Ocasio-Cortez wore to the Met Gala. And it says on here the names that we, the parents in the United States of America, have been called, including in the video that you featured, Chairman Raskin. Things like domestic terrorist, white supremacist, QAnon moms. What is it that we, the parents, have dared to stand up against in the United States of America over the last couple years? It is a divisive ideology expressed through this book called Critical Race Theory. It is a book that is taught in law schools, but it is translated into our school systems with books like this, Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. The trickle-down effect of the demonization of any human being because of their race is books like this. Where does this book take us as an idea? It takes us to this very simple idea, an idea that is a new hierarchy of human value. There is no doubt that the hierarchy of human value that was about white supremacy is illegitimate. Every single person is opposed to the idea of white supremacy. But we cannot replace an old hierarchy of human value with a new hierarchy of human value that demonizes children with this book, Whiteness is a Bad Deal, Signing a Contract with the Devil. What is the message in this? The message is the shaming of human beings. No child should be shamed. And why is this a threat to our democracy? Because we then have posters like this one in the Los Angeles School District. What does it say? F America, with KKK replacing the C. Because the idea is that our nation has become a white supremacist nation, and that is not true. That is not the reality, and we can see exhibited here today this poster also, F the police. This is an ideology that I call the woke army. It is an ideology of activists who are going through America's school districts and our communities, and what they are doing is a threat to democracy. What is the greatest threat that our children face today? It is the learning loss that has happened in our school districts. The Department of Justice declares clearly the characteristics that lead any human being to extremism include having less education. Chairman Raskin, I don't know if you know it, but the reading level in your school district, in Montgomery County Schools, is at 32% of kids that are reading at grade level. Math is at 30%. Congresswoman Tlaib is here. In Detroit, it's 18% and then 12% for math. It is a failure. This is a system failure. White supremacy must be defeated, as must all extremism. This is our mandate as adults for our children. Our children are in a crisis today, and the idea that we, the parents, are now the agents of white supremacy is unacceptable. All of these books that I have here today are the indoctrination that are being put into the minds of our children instead of the fundamentals that are critical to make them educated, enlightened citizens that protect our democracy. That is our greatest mandate, and that is the one that I am honored to serve with you to realize for our children. Thank you so much.